Welcome everyone, and also the people watching from home. I hope you'll be able to see everything very clear. If there's anything going wrong, then just put a message in the chat, and I hope that the organizers will pick it up. So I will also start sharing my screen, which is something commonly done in these types of days. There we go. And of course, the first slide, which is most important. Welcome everyone to this panel discussion. So today, and also what John already introduced in the last keynote speaker session that we had, will be hosted by me and by Katy. So Katy, I don't know, do you want to introduce yourself shortly? You are, yes.
Yeah, sure. I think Jean already introduced me, but I'm an assistant professor at Leiden University. I work in bioinformatics and data science.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Roos. I am working for Pipple, which is the company on the bottom of the slide. And we're one of the co-hosts of this day. And today we'll have this panel discussion. So, it goes a bit quicker somewhere else. Together with the panelists, who were also the 4 speakers of this morning. So Sally, Sujatha, Fleur, and Hinda. They already touched upon a few subjects this morning. So I heard things about biases. I heard things about use case applications. I heard things about also the female-male distinction that we have. I heard things about the fairness protocol. And that's also what we're going to talk about today in this session. So the overall theme of this session will be the impact of data and AI on society. But because this is a really big topic, we try to make it a little bit more specific by focusing on one specific article that was at least interesting to us. And I think also many people know something about this. This article is about recruitment. So Katy, could you explain what is in the article?
Yes, certainly. So this article came out on the BBC just a few weeks ago, and it describes a journalist who applied for a job in the normal way and then was quite surprised that the first round of the recruitment process was her playing some online games, and her answers to the questions, her performance during the games were assessed by an AI. And that resulted in the decision about whether she actually got to speak to a person or not about the job that she'd applied for. And so because she was a journalist, this resulted in her doing a big investigation on this whole topic of AI in recruitment. And Hinda already mentioned it in her keynote as well. It's becoming more common. In the article, there were several other examples of where AI has been used. So there were examples where people would record themselves making videos, answering questions from recruiters, and then an AI would monitor and assess the answers to those questions for the next stage of the recruitment process. There were also examples where AIs would troll the internet to find suitable candidates for particular jobs. The article also closes with the Amazon example that Hinda mentioned before, where over time, the AI seemed to learn from looking at CVs that actually male candidates were better, and therefore Amazon abandoned the project a couple of years ago. And so what we want to do with this session is, first of all, find out how we feel about this development. So is it a good thing or a bad thing that AI is being used in this way? And of course, we want to talk about this with the panel, but we thought before we did that it would be really nice to find out what everybody else thinks as well. So what we'd like to do first is ask you to answer a few poll questions. Could you put the next slide up, Rose, please? There.
Yes, so go ahead.
Go ahead.
So if you want to answer the poll questions, you can go to the right-hand side of your screen, and there should be a button called Sessions. Within there, you have a button called Slido, and there you can answer or poll questions. And well, Katy, you take it off.
Yeah, so the first question is just about whether anybody has had any experience of this before. You personally, somebody that you know, maybe you just don't know, or maybe you're just not sure, but that will give us some idea of, well, how pervasive this is at the moment. So please answer, and multiple answers, I think, are allowed in this question.
Yeah, so I see answers dropping in. We already have 30 people responding. It's still increasing. Do you see the answers as well, Katy?
I can't see the answers, no. So you'll have to tell us what people are saying.
So in the current statistics, what I see is so 35 people filled out the questionnaire, of which 38% says no. I've never had an experience, or a family member never had an experience where AIs are being used within the recruitment process. Also, the numbers are still shifting. 40% says I'm not sure. But there is a slight, there are some people, so 20% says, yeah, I myself actually had an occasion where I experienced AIs being used in the recruitment process. And 5% says that their family or friends have been in this process. That's actually more than I expected.
Yeah, me too. All right, so now we know that. Let's go on to the other questions, which are more about how you feel about this. So the next question is, if you were a company, why would you want to apply AI algorithms in this way? And we've suggested some answers. If you find yourself wanting to tick other here, then please think about what you would put there, and perhaps that will be a good question for the panel later on. If you wish to put those in the Q&A, that's also a good idea. Okay, answers. I can see that the number of answers is increasing, but I can't see what they are again, Roos.
Really? So did you fill out an answer yourself as well? Because I think then you can see the results. So also for the panelists.
Okay, then I will do that.
It's a little trick. You can even see the answers already.
Okay, so the biggest answer is, of course, to improve efficiency. A smaller proportion, 33%, suggests maybe to improve the fairness of the process, and a smaller percent again to improve the quality of the process. But largely it's about efficiency, and that I think you try to automate things when a process is getting a bit too large for humans to manage themselves, of course. Okay, let's go on to the next question. So now, why would companies not wish to do this? So what are the dangers of using AI in recruitment like this? And multiple answers are allowed, by the way, just in case you didn't realize you could click on more than one thing. Okay, so the numbers are still going up again, but it seems that a lot of people are worried about the introduction of bias and a lack of transparency, but a loss of the personal touch is not too far behind. And there are a few people who've written other there, so I'd be interested to find out what those other things are later. Okay, and then the final question, Roos. So now, how would you feel about being a candidate in an AI recruitment process? If you've already experienced this, you know how you feel, but if you haven't, can you imagine how that might make you feel? Okay, so almost half of respondents would not like it, but there are about 30% of people who are neutral and about 15% who would be happy about this. So we assume that everybody here is a tech-savvy person, so that's quite a strong result for not liking this as an approach, I think. But okay, so we're going to have a discussion now with the panel, but if there's time at the end, we might like to ask you this question again to see if what we discuss has changed your mind in any way. So first of all, I think it would make perfect sense to ask Hinda for her views, because just before this panel discussion, Hinda touched on this as a topic, and of course her whole talk was about bias and the problems associated with that. So Hinda, please tell us your views.
Hey, thanks, Katy. My views. So, well, I was actually at the receiving end of a recruitment screening software that asked me to post a small video pitching why I would be a good candidate. And not so long ago, I personally thought that was awful because it seemed that I didn't really have the power in this relationship with the potential future employer. Like I had to give them my data, my CV, where I lived, who I used to work at, and they also get to have a video of me, and I wouldn't know what they would do with it, and I wouldn't know, so it didn't feel great, and at some point I just decided not to go through with it. But from the employer perspective, what the argument was, we have thousands of applicants, we have to find a way to screen them and kind of highlight those that could be a good match. So that is a reasonable business question need, I would say. So that would make sense. But I think that for me, the fundamental issue also in terms of recruitment or things that really impact our lives as individuals is the issue of recourse. If I'm not happy with it, what are my options? Right. So when in terms of recruitment, I don't have many options except, from withdrawing from this opportunity, which in my case, I don't think that's really a choice. I think it's actually harmful that I don't have the opportunity to say, no, actually, I don't want to post a video. And I think when companies leverage AI, I think they might have in certain cases great reasons to do it, but they also need to think about what recourse do we give people, and not just from a regulatory point of view. Like we know GDPR in Europe gives us a lot of room for that, and with some form of right for an explanation, logic behind the automated system, decision-making process, but it also gives us the right to opt out. Right? But then what happens when we opt out? Do we really have that opportunity? Do we really have the power to do it? And in many cases, we don't. So it's just like the balance of power isn't in our favor as, at the receiving end of these automated systems. So from let's say, algorithmic view, to me, it makes sense to leverage AI for these tasks, but also people need to start thinking about recourse. And you're also missing out maybe on interesting or even essential business opportunities if you're not giving that option to people.
Thank you. Sorry, I was muted again. So I guess in an ordinary recruitment process, you have the right to ask why you were not selected as well. So if the answer is the algorithm said so, that's not really a good answer for most people, I would imagine. So maybe I could go on to you, Sujatha. You work in a large organization. You create products which are AI-based. So from a technical point of view, how do you mitigate unwanted bias when you're designing something like this?
Yeah, great question, and definitely a real challenge when we are looking at introducing AI for recruitment. So recently worked on a project specifically on this topic, helping recruiters in this in their match in an application where they can use job descriptions to match hundreds of CVs that are that they source for through different channels. and how we can build a simple NLP-based models to do a ranking based on the job descriptions on the CVs. But definitely a lot of challenges in that space around what data to use, what data not to use, any demographic data, age-related data, university qualifications. There's some things which are still important not to bring in. The other aspect is, when we are building a model to train on, are we using any of the historical data points around the success of candidates based on historical data? So we had detailed discussions on that, and we said we will not use historical data, not to bring in any additional biases, just to build a tool for mapping a job description with a bunch of technical CVs using data which is trained on specific NLP open source systems like Stack Overflow data and those sorts of things. The area where we wanted to help out using this application was recruiters find it hard to scan CVs because there are so many new technical terminologies that keep coming up, and job descriptions are there for them to guide, but it's harder for them to keep up with that. The volume is one, quality of screening is one. So our goal was to help out in improving the efficiency and the quality angle, but keeping in mind that we are not introducing unwanted biases into the system by training on any historical data. So this is just a simple way to filter out data for them, but not finally making the decisions per se.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. I think if you have large volumes of people applying for a job and it's a very technical job, the people who would do the initial screening are maybe not qualified to identify the differences between those. So then that's an example of a very positive intervention that you might be able to make by looking at the data in a new way. Are there other positive outcomes that might come from this? We've been talking a little bit about the negative side, but what are the opportunities here for redressing biases and redressing imbalance that we already see? I don't know who wants to answer that question. Whoever has a view about it, I guess. Sally, please go ahead.
Well, I think a lot depends on how you've programmed the AI system and what you're asking it to do and what factors to take into account and what data to take into account. So again, as I guess my role here is partly to be the old person. I can remember back in the kind of 80s in England, where I was living at the time, and into the 90s, certainly in organizations, so including universities, we had to apply equal opportunities hiring practices. And that included removing all data around age, gender, ethnicity from application forms before they got to the so somebody in the administration did that before they got to the selection committee. So the idea was that then you would really look at people's qualifications rather than making assumptions based on their gender, ethnicity, age. And it sometimes also went so far as we also had to ask questions in a particular order. So it's, yeah, because that can make a huge difference to the kinds of impressions people got. But to go back to, so you could think of developing AI systems where the purpose is to try and level the playing field, so to speak. But then I think you need to think about, okay, what data would we need and what data would we need to exclude from the kind of application process? And I think then, I mean, I'm not sure what I would think about this, but I think you could think about trying to develop a fair AI system for recruitment, system that may, if people haven't thought about the programming of the bias and whatever, might come into it. And of course, you know, employers have been using maybe not AI, but all sorts of systems to discriminate. I mean, psychometric testing is not exactly a model of fairness and equal opportunities, and lots of employers have been using that. I mean, that's not to justify using another bad system, but just to remember that it's not new.
Yeah, to Sally's point, what I find interesting is that a lot of companies that want to automate some of these tasks, they do it because they want to put more fairness into their process. Not so much to kind of discriminate against people. But the thing is with algorithms is that, as I mentioned in my talk, they are cheap and they scale very easily. So if you happen to make a mistake at a scale in an algorithm, it will just make more mistakes and be, you know, harmful to way more people than if you just do it at, like, say, a more human level of like manual type of work and sorts of, you know, in these issues of recruitment, for example. And that's the issue, right? Is that it's just the problem scales dramatically with automating this type of activity.
Yeah, so the mistakes are bigger just
Absolutely.
as a result of the automation. Okay, so if we imagine that this is going to go to be more pervasive in the future, what kinds of rules and regulations and policies can we put into place to kind of mitigate any unwanted effects? And Fleur, you talked a lot about the legal aspects of working with healthcare data because it's very sensitive data. What can we learn from the healthcare industry and the regulations around your industry in something like this?
Yeah, thanks, Katy. Yeah, but before going healthcare side, I also wanted to say, based on what Hinda said, in recruitment, there's no way back, right? So if once you're turned down, you probably don't want the job again. If we're within our own internal processes thinking about where to put AI, we're mostly, for now, right, because we're still a little bit beginning, using it for processes that can be easily fixed. So if an email goes to the wrong workflow because my neural network was flawed, it can be fixed by an employee that puts it in the right workflow. However, a medical authorization that was declined, it's much easier to fix because then maybe someone has gotten, like a disease might have progressed. So really also based on the domain, choosing how transparent should your decision be and how much explainability do you want here. So that's kind of a rule of thumb that we use when we're choosing a model. Now about regulations in healthcare, very soon the medical device regulation will come into place where all decision aids in healthcare need to be certified and they're heavily regulated. And that's obviously a very good thing, right? Because it goes about sensitive topics. What I wanted to point out here is that you should probably worry about loopholes that might be in the regulations that will create the exact opposite effect of what you're hoping for. So an example here is that if a hospital or a healthcare provider designs his own algorithm, it can be used without any regulation, and it does not need to be certified because it was developed and built in-house and can therefore also be used in-house. So this will, at least that's what I fear, create subpar algorithms that might even be worse than the uncertified algorithms created by big tech or commercial companies that at least have a lot of eyes viewing them, right? And where the market will also judge if it's really wrong. So I see a lot of potential if there are options for companies and firms to use their own stuff, but not buy stuff because the regulatory framework is way too strict.
So that's a very good point. So if bringing in regulation is hopefully a good thing, but it has to be done in the right way. And if certain things are still allowed, then we still have to monitor the effects of things like in-house algorithms. Roos, are there questions from the audience?
Yeah, there has been one question from the audience, Mark van Meel, but I think actually the question was already addressed. So he was asking for, so what if a solution is objectively more fair than human intervention within the recruitment process? But I think Hinda and Sally already touched upon that and actually said that a lot of companies start building these type of algorithms because they want a more fair protocol for their recruitment. I actually do have a follow-up question for Fleur, because oh, I do hear a lot. Fleur, you mentioned that so actually companies, what Oh, I'm totally blacking out. Sometimes that happens, right? I think you mentioned something about companies that start to develop their own systems, and because they do not want to buy the systems from other companies, because that's where you actually have to follow certain rules and guidelines. But instead, so they are actually starting to develop their own algorithms within their own company. What is your opinion about how safe this is? Because I can imagine if every company by itself is starting to develop algorithms for their own company, this also might bring in some risks, right? So
Yes, definitely.
how should a company actually work with these types of risks?
Yeah, well, so I guess for every project, be it data science, be it IT or anything else, you should make a good make or buy decision, right? And if you decide that you want to make something, it should not be to avoid regulations. It should be because you think that it's better suited for your situation to make it yourself, or because your situation is so unique or your skills are so good that you make something yourself. So, for example, for us, we've decided that everything that has to do with audio, video, CZ will never be better than the existing APIs that can help us there. But for a lot of our services that have to do with NLP, we have decided that we should make those ourselves because it's about the language of our customers and the language of our internal employees. So it's very, very rarely buy, but mostly make. So I guess it, yeah, of course, depends on the domain. And as long as you can make a good decision and not just ducking regulations.
Informed about regulations that exist,
yeah,
and
definitely.
try to follow those.
Yeah, force yourself also, right, to read up on them, because it's not the lightest thing to read, but really, yeah, make some time so that you understand what's going on and what the risk might be.
Yeah. All right.
Is there maybe a way that we can actively learn from past mistakes as well? Can we quantify the wrongness of existing algorithms to try and compare anything new against it, perhaps? Is that a possibility? Probably
I can go. I can maybe say something about this one. It definitely helps to learn from past mistakes, but I think also we need to keep something in mind, that a lot of the things that we see in the media or in scientific publications or so, we don't always have access to the actual code of the tool that was causing the issue. We don't necessarily have enough details about the decisions that were made in the design process. So we have some understanding of what happened, and and usually it's because someone really pursued that matter and really, I don't know, wrote an article about it. But it's not something that companies or different institutions are necessarily willing to communicate about or even share with the wider public. So it's also difficult to kind of learn from those mistakes. We can definitely look at what happened in the past, particularly, for example, in facial recognition. We know what's wrong with that. We know when it works, when it doesn't work. It's been widely documented for years. So that is maybe more documented than what would happen if, say, a company will start analyzing your data if you use a chatbot on their website, for example. But again, I think there are also some things that are more in the domain of common sense. We know it's also sometimes try to give definitions and be very rigorous, but sometimes I also think, how did nobody think about this? How nobody thought that this would be an issue? I mean, come on. But then again, we also need to think about the context in which these products are developed. And as I said, it also comes down to who has the power to make the decisions, to call the shots. Is it the people that we are training right now as academics, as the folks that when we lecture to students and so on, are we giving them all the tools that they need to, stand up to their future managers and say, no, this is not how we should be doing it? But is that enough? Is regulation enough? Is GDPR enough? we actually have tools to contest these, ways of working that lead to catastrophic consequences for individuals and communities. And I'm not very optimistic there, because we see things happening and we get worried about it and we have these discussions about it, but there is also a lot that's happening that we are not aware of, right? And we only tend to talk about things that go really wrong, but there may be things going wrong right now and we won't know it before a few years. So I think we also need to keep that in mind when trying to learn from, these mistakes that we see in the press, for instance.
Yeah.
And now we actually get a follow-up question here from Tanya. She's asking, if there's a lack of info and understanding, don't you think that it should be beneficial for a person to store personal data in a personal pot or like a solid platform and decide by itself what kind of data would be provided or sold and to whom?
If I understand this correctly, it would be kind of up to the user or the customer to decide what to give and what to give away or not. I definitely think that data is a currency, and I'm very protective of my data, and I always try to be very careful to whom I share it with and what I'm sharing it for. I think I'm not sure how feasible this would be, because again, I think we'll see a lot of resistance saying, if you don't give us your data, then you won't get the service. Right. So, and some of us can afford not to be on certain social, media platforms, or, and going through certain recruitment channels when you want to apply to a company. But sometimes can we really afford it, even if it becomes a currency that we can decide who to give it to, yes or no? I think that's more, this is a wider discussion that we're having about who really can empower us. How can we empower ourselves to say, no, no, I'm not going to be giving you this data, but I still would like to shop on your website. Right? And then if it's not possible, what's my recourse? Is there another website where I can buy the same type of stuff, but not without giving, my whole medical history, for example? I'm just exaggerating, but you can imagine this being the case. But I also see it on the other side, like if kind of on the negative perspective, where some of us would have more freedom into deciding when to sell or to share our private data than others, because we have more opportunities, or we have a different economic background, for example, right? So we can afford to decide when to share our personal data. And if you go to other countries where there are maybe less regulation in terms of private data, sometimes in certain countries, it's not even a conversation that people have. People don't even know about the concept of private data, personal data, and how they share it. So it's also about education, I guess, here, but it's also, we're not all equal when it comes to deciding when to share our private data. So we're not only in Europe, but also in the rest of the world.
Yeah, so this comes back to a point that Sally made this morning. So you said that education was the most important thing for future redressing the balance, but also to reduce unfairness. And you also said discrimination is illegal. So how do we make sure that the AIs are not acting illegally, and who is responsible when they do? So could we look to the future a little bit?
Yeah, no, really interesting questions, really interesting discussion. And I think, what and others, I think the domain is really important, what kind of data we're talking about, kind of when, but also I think what's really interesting has just come out of the discussion is what exactly does mean here about sharing data, because I'm sure we've all had experiences where if you say no, you can't go any further. I think Hinda was giving examples of that as well, and that isn't informed consent, that's coercion or blackmail. But I think when it comes to sharing data, and I mean, I've always really liked the idea of personal data, and we decide what we're going to share with whom and when. And I think that's also really important when it comes to healthcare data, because, but these are really complicated and complex discussions about, what kind of data is this? What would it be used for? Things you might think are actually quite harmless, if combined with other things could do harm. And making people aware of this is, I think, really a major task at the moment, given how much data circulates around about us all the time at the moment. And you see, I mean, I'm sure some of you have had experience as well of talking about this with students. They can suddenly become really surprised and shocked about the kind of data that's out there about them. If you ask them to do some kind of personal data audit or review, But I think we have to keep doing those sorts of activities with people, and not just kind of go with the convenience option and click yes because you're in a hurry to do something. But I think that requires a lot of education at all sorts of levels. And I know you had, oh, and how to, I was trying, I can't remember it, but maybe somebody else here does. I think it was one of the Dutch municipalities, maybe Amsterdam, maybe Utrecht, who's keeping a register of data used by public authorities about us. And part of the purpose of that is to kind of try and check for bias and discrimination. And I think, of course, you know, we can do that with, you know, the universities, with healthcare organizations, with schools, but for private organizations, that's really difficult. And as we all know, the vast majority of this data is in private hands, of private companies. So yeah, I think it's really difficult, but I think there are lots of efforts to do things. And I think we have to also, because I don't think it's a sort of one size fits all answer or regulation, because that's what you see with, certainly with the GDPR, which I'm sure was really well intended. Well, now there are all sorts of things that we can't do that are actually perfectly helpful and innocent, but go against certain kinds of, you know, the kind of unintended consequences of the GDPR are enormous.
Yeah, I don't know if this is what you were talking about, Sally, but I saw the municipality of Amsterdam, who published an algorithm registry even. So not even data, but also all the algorithms they used. And we've discussed this at great lengths within my company to see if we should also publish something like that. But it's difficult. Yeah, but we're not a private company, right? But somewhere in the middle of public and private, and it's, yeah. Sometimes you also think you want some competitive edge with all the algorithms that you're using within the small space that we have within the Dutch market competition. But I really, really admired the openness that they created there. And I think it's a really cool inspiration.
Yeah, it sounds great. I didn't know about that. I think I'll certainly look it up later. Perhaps we could have more perspective on that as well, Sujatha, because you come from the other side. Not
yeah, I think just what Sally mentioned as well, right? I think we need to have investments done more around tools to identify where our data is sitting, or creating awareness to that as an individual, as a student, as somebody who is not in a technical field, as any person, if we need to equip them with more and more solutions and tools to, first of all, identify where their data is sitting, then continue to be aware of how to recourse from that, right? I think I can be also surprised when I will see how much data I have shared, even despite all those times that we go and manage those preferences all the time. But then as long as we are continuously helping and have a way to recourse, okay, I made a mistake once, but can I fix it at least now, and then continue to not make the same things again and again. So I think it's a big problem, as we are all discussing, but then something that we need to be constantly working on, and technology and tools need to be invested in these spaces as well, to make it easier to identify and recourse from it precisely. And coming back to the recruitment topic also, when I am submitting to a job site, if they can also mention that there is a tool which is evaluating the first step, something which is as basic as certain formats don't work. So we came across that when we did our project. We saw that there are certain formats where some information could be missed out, even with advanced tooling that we have. Although if I am submitting it, and if we know that there is a tool which is working, maybe I can already opt out and say, or change the format. I think I should have the ability to understand and make the right decisions, rather than missing out on the opportunities, both for candidate and for the companies, I would say.
Yeah, so it could be a positive thing, but recourse is certainly something that is missing at the moment. I think that's a very clear message from everybody. perhaps I see that we're very fast running out of time, but it's been a very interesting discussion, so I'm not surprised about that. Do we have other questions from the audience, Rose?
I have 3 questions here. Maybe we can address one of them and then do the final poll and close.
Okay, sounds good.
So we have one question from Nargis, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Umudova. And she is asking the following, or he. According to GDPR, the data subject shall have the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing, including profiling, which produces legal effects concerning him or her, or similarly significantly affects him or her. So she's saying GDPR is stating that we cannot have automated decisions by an AI. How does the article how that is applied to recruitment, how would we actually possibly overcome or even combine humans with AI decision-making within this recruitment process? Because if you already filter out the first set of people based on an AI, that would actually be making decisions based on AIs. So how does that work? I don't know if this question might be best answered by Sujatha.
So I think it's not, so that's why the tool cannot be the only thing making the decision, right? There is no, it cannot be a filtering technique. It can be just an a ranking one. Again, that can be questioned as well, absolutely. But more around how we can augment a human who's making a decision with not much of knowledge about something, augmenting them with some extra extra information that is coming in from a tool to make it a better decision making in general, but not as a substitute for bypassing a human eye to take a look at it. I think that we are not there yet. We are experimenting with tools. We are experimenting with all of these things, but I think it's we cannot confidently say that yes, and a tool can do what we want to do without introducing bias or have any kind of unfairness in the system.
Yeah. Okay. Then I think it's time for the last poll question. So we actually want to go back to the last question that we asked in the first part, which was the following. And Katy, I give it back to you.
Yeah, so now you've heard the discussion. Clearly, the right to recourse is a very big signal that's come out of the discussion. If we had that in place, would your views change on the use of AI in recruitment? Would you be more happy with it than you were just over half an hour ago?
Yes, so if you want to answer the poll, you can go to the right-hand side session and then Slido and then polls. That's where you can add your answer.
Oh, that's very interesting. There's more neutral people now. So nobody's brave enough to say they would be happy about it from being unhappy before, but they've shifted a tiny bit. So perhaps there's some room in the future, but perhaps not until we change some things. Perhaps we still have some work to do. And in the meantime, I guess some of us will have to deal with this already. Okay, well, thank you ever so much for your participation today, the audience and our panelists. I think it's been a tremendously interesting discussion. And yeah, I think the whole event today has been a really good thing. And thank you very much for inviting us to chair the session. And maybe I can hand back to you, Jean, at this point.
Yes, thank you so much, Katy and Rose, for moderating that excellent panel discussion, and of course to our panelists and speakers. We've really enjoyed this discussion. I think a lot of people got involved, asked a lot of very interesting questions there. So I'd just like to share my screen once more. There we are. Yes, so I think we are right at the end of today's session, or today's event, I should say. We would really like to thank again our inspiring speakers, our moderators, and the WiDS Netherlands team who helped organize this, and of course our organizations for letting us really commit the time to do this. And of course our sponsors who are very generous with their support. So the Data Science Center at the University of Amsterdam, Yacht, SAS, Elsevier, Rabobank, and APG, and we also got a lot of support from Yacht. And thank you so much to our audience today. You have been fantastic, especially with using Hopin, which is, I think, a new platform for many people. And we've really, really enjoyed giving you this excellent event, and we hope to do so again next year.